5-year-old computer prodigy hacked into company's system only to discover CEO was his unseen father. Hi, my beautiful story family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. I hope you're all doing well, and may God always keep a smile on your face. Yesterday, I made a small mistake, and unfortunately some of my loyal subscribers expressed their disappointment in harsh comments, with a few even unsubscribing. It truly broke my heart. I want to clarify that anyone can have blonde hair, regardless of their background. My wife, who is a proud black woman, has blonde hair, and I celebrate her uniqueness. I dedicate 16 hours a day to creating stories for you because I love what I do and because you, my family, means so much to me. But after that one mistake, the criticism left me in tears. At one point, I even thought about stopping. However, I realized there are still so many of you who love and eagerly wait for my stories. I am deeply sorry for any misunderstanding or hurt I may have caused. If you accept my apology, please let me know in the comments. Your support motivates me, and knowing that you enjoy my stories means the world to me. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Let's continue growing together as a family. With love, Mr. Peter. In the soft glow of quantum processors and holographic displays, a 5-year-old boy was rewriting the laws of what should be possible. Rain tapped against the 15th floor window of their Manhattan apartment, each drop casting digital shadows across Casimir Ambrosia's face, as his small fingers danced across a keyboard specially designed for his tiny hands. Lines of code reflected in his hazel eyes. Eyes that sometimes shifted green in certain lights, just like the father he'd never met. "Tell me again about the patterns, Mom," he whispered, never taking his gaze from the cascading algorithms on his center screen. "About how Dad could see music in mathematics." Ambrosia Hendry paused in the doorway of what should have been a typical child's bedroom. Instead of toy cars and action figures, quantum computing components lined the shelves. Instead of cartoon posters, complex encryption diagrams covered the walls, each one holding hidden messages that only her son seemed able to understand. Her wild curls, matched perfectly by Casimir's own unruly mop, fell forward as she moved to kneel beside him. The quantum processors hummed a harmony that seemed to sync with their shared heartbeats. "Your father," she began softly, watching his fingers fly across the keys with inherited grace, "saw patterns everywhere, in raindrops, in starlight, in the way people think. He used to say that the universe wasn't written in numbers, but in songs. You just had to know how to listen." Casimir nodded, his young face intense with concentration as he implemented an encryption sequence that shouldn't have been possible for someone 4 times his age. On his screens, security protocols for his elementary school's network unveiled themselves like digital flowers blooming in accelerated time. "I can hear it too," he said quietly, his voice carrying that peculiar mix of childish wonder and profound understanding that often made Ambrosia's heart ache. "The patterns, they sing to me, especially late at night, when everything's quiet, except the computers." A warning flashed across his rightmost screen. The school's security system had detected his presence, but instead of panic, a small smile played across Casimir's face. His fingers moved in a new rhythm, implementing protection protocols that transformed his digital footprints into harmless system checks. "Sunshine," Ambrosia said carefully, recognizing the encryption method he was using. "Where did you learn that particular algorithm?" "I didn't learn it," he replied, still focused on his work. "It just felt right, like remembering a song I heard in a dream." Ambrosia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the quantum-encrypted pendant she always wore, the one containing code sequences that Grayson had written 5 years ago, patterns that matched exactly what their son was creating now. Through the window behind them, Manhattan's lights painted patterns across the rain-streaked glass. But in the reflection, Ambrosia caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch. For just a moment, Casimir's position at his workstation, the intent look in his eyes, the way his fingers moved across the keys. It was exactly like watching Grayson work on the night he discovered what would become Project Legacy. "Mom?" Casimir's voice pulled her back to the present. "I found something strange in the school's network. Look at this pattern." She leaned forward, and her heart nearly stopped. There, hidden in what should have been simple school administration code, was an encrypted signature she hadn't seen in 5 years. Grayson's distinctive style, evolved but unmistakable. "That's impossible," she whispered, even as her fingers moved to her own keyboard, implementing emergency protocols that had laid dormant since Boston. "That encryption sequence, it's private, classified. It shouldn't exist anywhere outside of—" "Outside of what?" Casimir asked, turning to face her with those two wise eyes. "Mom, what's happening?" But Ambrosia was already moving, activating security systems hidden throughout their apartment. Through her quantum-linked displays, she could see what she'd feared most: multiple consciousness patterns converging on their location, digital signatures that matched the shadow organizations that had forced them into hiding when Casimir was still in her womb. "Remember all those emergency drills we practiced?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The ones you said were like playing spy games?" Casimir nodded slowly, his young face growing serious as he recognized the tension in her voice. "They weren't games, Sunshine, and right now, I need you to be the brilliant boy I know you are, the one who sees patterns like your father, who understands things that should be impossible." Their apartment's hidden quantum processors began humming at a higher frequency as Ambrosia activated their emergency protocols. Behind the innocent-looking walls, military-grade encryption systems came online, implementing protection algorithms that Grayson had designed specifically for this moment. "Someone found us?" Casimir asked quietly, his fingers never stopping their dance across his keyboard as he began implementing his own protection protocols, ones he'd created himself, their sophistication far beyond his years. "No, Sunshine," Ambrosia corrected, watching as his code merged perfectly with their apartment's quantum security systems. "I think you found something. Something they've been trying to keep hidden, something your father left for us to discover." Through their windows, the Manhattan night sparkled with possibility and danger. But Casimir wasn't watching the city lights. His attention was fixed on a new pattern emerging in his code, a signature that seemed to call to him through the quantum network, its rhythm matching perfectly with the way his own mind worked through problems. "Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and fear. I think Dad's trying to reach us, through the code." As if in response, every quantum processor in their apartment surged with new energy. On Casimir's screens, encryption patterns began shifting and flowing like digital mercury, forming sequences that seemed to dance between order and chaos, just like the patterns Grayson had once used to write love letters to Ambrosia in pure mathematics. The game of hide-and-seek they'd been playing for 5 years was about to change. The little genius who had inherited his father's gift for seeing music in mathematics was about to embark on a journey that would challenge not just his extraordinary abilities, but the very nature of human consciousness itself. Outside their window, the rain continued to fall, each drop containing patterns that only a select few could see. Among the millions of minds in Manhattan that night, one brilliant 5-year-old boy was about to discover that his inherited gift for code would lead him to something far more precious than mere technology. The truth about his father and the legacy of love hidden in the space between quantum states. Chapter 2. Hidden Truths. The quantum alarm on Ambrosia's wrist device pulsed silently at 2:47 a.m., the exact time Grayson had disappeared from their lives 5 years ago. She sat at her vintage vanity, the antique wood and brass, a stark contrast to the cutting-edge technology hidden within its frame. The mirror reflected her face in the dim light, but superimposed over her reflection was a holographic display showing Casimir sleeping peacefully in his room, surrounded by gently humming quantum processors. Her fingers trembled as they traced the intricate pattern carved into the vanity's edge. Not just decorative scrollwork, but a complex encryption key Grayson had created, disguised as Victorian craftsmanship. 5 years of running, 5 years of protecting their son, and still the weight of secrets threatened to crush her. "Execute Protocol Midnight," she whispered to the seemingly ordinary mirror. The quantum processors hidden within the vanity hummed to life, projecting a secure workspace around her. This was her nightly ritual, one she had maintained ever since that fateful night in Boston when everything changed. From a hidden compartment that would only respond to her quantum-encrypted fingerprint, she withdrew a small wooden box. To anyone else, it would appear to be a simple jewelry case, worn with age and unremarkable. But like everything else in their lives, its ordinary appearance masked extraordinary technology. As she opened the lid, quantum sensors scanned her neural patterns, confirming her identity at the deepest possible level. Inside, nestled among ordinary jewelry, lay something priceless, a quantum crystal barely larger than a diamond, containing the last message Grayson had left for her. Her fingers brushed the crystal, and the air around her filled with soft light as a holographic image formed, Grayson as he had been 5 years ago, his sandy hair falling into eyes that shifted green in certain lights, just like their son's did now. "My love," his recorded image spoke, his voice making her heart ache with fresh pain. "If you're watching this again, it means another year has passed. Another year I've had to stay away to keep you both safe. But there's something you need to know." The image flickered, and suddenly she was seeing a different recording, one she had never seen before. Grayson in his MIT lab, the night he made the discovery that would change everything. "They're watching me." His voice was urgent now, different from the yearly message she had memorized. "Elena's team found something in the consciousness encryption tests, a pattern that shouldn't be possible. They don't understand what it means yet. But if they figure it out—" Ambrosia's breath caught. This was new footage, spliced into the quantum crystal through some method she didn't understand. But how? The crystal had been secure, unchanged for 5 years. The image shifted again, showing Grayson in what appeared to be a high-tech facility. The timestamp showed this recording was from just 3 months ago. "Ambrosia, if you're seeing this, it means Casimir has started finding his way through my encryption. Our son. God, he must be so brilliant now. I've seen traces of his digital signature in systems he shouldn't be able to access for years. He has both our gifts and more." She glanced at her security feeds, watching their sleeping son. Today's discovery in his school's network took on new meaning. Had Grayson known this would happen? Had he been watching, waiting? The hologram continued, Grayson's face showing lines of worry she had never seen before. "Project Legacy isn't what they think it is. The consciousness encryption, the quantum patterns, it was never about security systems or military applications. It was about protection, about preserving what makes us human in a world that's trying to turn consciousness itself into code." A soft sound from Casimir's room made her freeze the playback. On her security feed, she watched as he stirred in his sleep, his hands moving as if typing on invisible keys. The quantum processors around his bed pulsed in sync with his movements, responding to his unconscious commands. "Like father, like son," she whispered, remembering how Grayson used to do the same thing, solving complex algorithms even in his dreams. She resumed the message, and Grayson's image seemed to look directly into her eyes. They're getting closer to understanding what the technology can really do. Elena, she's brilliant, but she doesn't see the danger, or maybe she does, and that's what terrifies me most. They want to use the consciousness encryption to control minds, to rewrite human thought patterns on a fundamental level. The hologram flickered again, showing brief flashes of complex quantum equations that made Ambrosia's heart race. She recognized these patterns. They were appearing in Casimir's recent code, emerging naturally from his inherited genius. "But our son," Grayson continued, pride and fear mixing in his voice, "he'll understand what I've hidden in the encryption. The true purpose of Project Legacy, the protection protocols I've embedded in quantum space itself. Ambrosia, my love, you've taught him so well. I've watched his consciousness patterns developing through the quantum network. He's nearly ready." A new alert pulsed on her security feeds, unusual network activity in their building. Her fingers flew to her keyboard, implementing additional protection protocols. But something about the incoming signal made her pause. The pattern was familiar, hauntingly familiar. It matched the quantum signature she'd first detected the night she met Grayson at that cybersecurity conference in Boston. The night he had handed her a rose with binary code written on its petals in quantum ink. Her screens filled with cascading data as the signal grew stronger. Through the quantum network, she could feel a consciousness pattern reaching out. Not attacking, but searching. Searching for something specific. Grayson's hologram shifted one final time, showing him in what appeared to be a secure room, his face tense with urgency. "They've found me. Elena's team tracked the consciousness patterns I've been using to watch over you both. But that's okay. It's all part of the plan. Everything I've built, every protection I've designed, was leading to this moment." The incoming signal grew stronger, and Ambrosia's quantum sensors began picking up fragments of code that made her hands shake. Embedded in the signal were pieces of the lullaby Grayson had written for their unborn son, the one she still sang to Casimir every night. "The quantum crystal you're holding," Grayson's image continued, "isn't just a message. It's a key. One part of a three-piece encryption that can only be completed by the three consciousness patterns that make up our family. I encoded my part 5 years ago. You've been carrying yours in your quantum signature all this time, and now—" "Casimir," Ambrosia whispered, understanding dawning as she watched her son's sleeping form on the security feed. His hands were still moving in his sleep, but now she could see that his unconscious coding matched perfectly with the incoming signal's patterns. The hologram smiled, and for a moment she saw in Grayson's face the same expression Casimir wore when solving particularly elegant encryption problems. "Our son is the key to everything, Ambrosia. His consciousness patterns, his inherited ability to see the music in mathematics. He's the bridge between our quantum signatures, the final piece that will make Project Legacy what it was always meant to be." Suddenly, every quantum processor in their apartment surged with new energy. On Ambrosia's screens, she watched as 3 distinct consciousness patterns began to align. Her own quantum signature, the incoming signal that could only be Grayson, and Casimir's unconscious coding, each one harmonizing with the others in ways that should have been impossible. The quantum crystal in her hands pulsed with pure light as new data emerged. Locations, security codes, and most importantly, a message hidden so deeply in the encryption that only the combined consciousness patterns of their family could have revealed it. The time has come. They think they're hunting us, but we're drawing them exactly where they need to be. Every move they make brings them closer to understanding the true power of consciousness encryption, not as a weapon, but as a shield. My love, wake our son. Show him the photographs, the quantum records, everything you've kept hidden. He's ready now. His work in the school's network today proved it. Let him see who he really is, not just our child. but the guardian of something precious, humanity's right to think freely, to love freely, to grow freely. The next few days will change everything. Elena's team is closing in, but they don't understand what they're really chasing. Project Legacy isn't in any computer system or quantum network. It's in our blood, in our thoughts, in the unique way our family sees patterns in the chaos of existence. Trust in what we built together, trust in our son's inherited genius. Most importantly, trust in the love that even quantum encryption can't fully capture. "I'm coming home." The hologram faded, leaving Ambrosia alone in the quantum-secured darkness. But something had fundamentally changed. The weight of secrets she'd carried for 5 years felt different now. Not lighter, but purposeful. She stood, moving to her own workstation where multiple screens showed their apartment's quantum security grid. Her fingers flew across the keys, implementing new protocols that would protect them through what was to come. Behind her, the vanity's mirror reflected 3 distinct consciousness patterns dancing in quantum space, past, present, and future converging in a symphony of digital harmony. The time for hiding was over. Now it was time to show their son exactly who he was and why the gift he'd inherited from both his parents might be the only thing standing between humanity's consciousness and those who would seek to control it. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the beginning of a journey that would either reunite their family or tear the very fabric of human consciousness apart. Chapter 3. The Discovery. 3 months after their midnight escape from Manhattan, Casimir sat in the window seat of their new apartment in Seattle, rain streaming down the glass like rivers of binary code. The Space Needle pierced the fog in the distance, its outline barely visible through the perpetual Pacific Northwest mist. Their emergency relocation had become an adventure, just as his mother had promised, but the young prodigy knew they weren't merely traveling for pleasure. His new workspace was smaller than the one in New York, but Ambrosia had made sure it was equally well equipped. 3 monitors formed a half-circle around his custom-built keyboard, a special model with keys sized for his small fingers. The hardware was different, but his mission remained the same: to understand the digital world that seemed to speak to him in ways others couldn't hear. "Just a quick systems check," he whispered to himself, his mother's warnings about responsible hacking echoing in his mind. But today felt different. The rain had been falling for 72 hours straight, and in that hypnotic rhythm, Casimir had discovered something unusual in his regular scan of corporate networks. Quantum Tech Solutions wasn't like other companies he'd explored. Their security was elegant, almost artistic, with layers that seemed to dance and shift like the aurora borealis he'd seen during their brief stay in Alaska. Most corporate firewalls were brute force affairs, thick walls meant to keep intruders out. But this was different. It was like the code itself was alive. "Show me your secrets," Casimir murmured, his fingers moving across the keys in a rhythm that matched the falling rain. He wasn't trying to break in, not really. He just wanted to understand how something so beautiful could exist in the usually rigid world of corporate cybersecurity. His first probe was gentle, respectful, like asking for permission to dance. To his surprise, the system responded, not with the usual aggressive countermeasures, but with what felt like curiosity. Lines of code shifted, creating patterns that seemed oddly familiar. In the kitchen, Ambrosia was preparing dinner, humming softly to herself, a habit she'd developed to mask the sound of her son's typing. The apartment filled with the aroma of her signature curry, but Casimir barely noticed. He was too entranced by what he was discovering. Layer by layer, the security protocols revealed themselves, each one more fascinating than the last. It wasn't just code, it was poetry written in programming language. Some segments seemed to respond to his presence, adjusting and adapting like a living thing. Others felt like puzzles, specifically designed to intrigue rather than repel. "This is impossible," he breathed, leaning closer to his center monitor. The code structure was unlike anything he'd seen before, yet somehow he knew it. It felt like remembering a song he'd heard in dreams or recognizing a face he'd never seen. His fingers moved faster now, not attacking but harmonizing with the system's rhythms. Each response revealed new layers of complexity, and with them, something else, something hidden beneath the surface beauty of the code. A dialog box appeared on his screen. Pattern recognition initiated analyzing coding signature. Match found. Confidence level, 98.7%. Casimir's heart raced. He'd never seen a system recognize his coding style before. Usually, he was careful to mask his digital fingerprint, using randomized patterns to avoid detection. But he hadn't bothered this time, too captivated by the artistry of what he'd found. Another window opened. Project Legacy. Authorized access, required genetic signature, detected initiating secondary protocols. Genetic signature, Casimir whispered, confused. How could a computer system detect something in his DNA through code? Before he could process this strange development, his screens filled with cascading data, fragments of project files, security protocols, and most intriguingly, lines of code that perfectly matched his own preferred programming style. But these weren't his creations. They were older, dating back years before he was born. A photo flashed briefly on the screen, a younger version of his mother standing next to a man with sandy brown hair and eyes that shifted green in certain lights, just like his own. The image vanished before he could capture it, but it burned itself into his memory. "Mom," he called out, his voice shaking slightly, "can you come here for a minute?" Ambrosia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her easy smile faded as she saw the look on her son's face and the patterns flowing across his screens. The towel dropped from her suddenly lifeless fingers. "What have you found?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "I think—" Casimir swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving the screen where new data continued to emerge. "I think I found him. I found Dad." The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like 1,000 fingers on keyboards. Ambrosia moved closer, her hand coming to rest on Casimir's shoulder. "Show me," she whispered. Casimir's fingers flew across the keys, pulling up the remnants of what he'd discovered. "It's quantum tech solutions, their security system. It's like looking in a mirror, Mum. The code, it's structured exactly like mine, but these timestamps. Some of this code was written before I was born." Ambrosia leaned closer, her curls brushing against Casimir's cheek as she studied the screen. He felt her grip on his shoulder tighten as she recognized patterns she hadn't seen in 5 years. "There's more," he continued, his voice gaining excitement. "The system recognized me somehow. Not just my coding style, but something it called a genetic signature. Is that even possible? Your father," Ambrosia said softly, "was working on biometric security protocols before everything changed. He believed that coding style was as unique as DNA, that our way of thinking showed up in how we wrote code. But this—" She gestured at the screen. "This is far beyond what he'd developed back then." A new window suddenly popped up on the rightmost screen. Unauthorized access detected initiating containment protocols. Trace program activated. Ambrosia's hand flew to the power button, but Casimir stopped her. "Wait, look at this!" Beneath the warning message, almost hidden in the cascading code, was a single line. "The apple never falls far from the tree, little one, but sometimes it rolls into dangerous gardens." "It's him," Ambrosia breathed. "That's how he used to talk about coding problems, always in riddles and metaphors." Casimir's fingers were already moving, trying to preserve the connection, but the system was closing down around them. sealing off access points faster than he could process them. Yet even in retreat, the code seemed to be leading him somewhere, leaving breadcrumbs he could follow. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I don't think this was an accident. The security system, it's like it was waiting for me, like it recognized me because it was designed to." Ambrosia was already moving, her practiced movements suggesting she'd been preparing for this moment. She pulled a small device from her desk drawer, something that looked like a normal external hard drive but hummed with hidden purpose. "Copy everything you can," she instructed, plugging the device into his system. "But be careful. If this is your father's work, there will be layers we can't see yet. He always loved his puzzles within puzzles." As Casimir worked to preserve what he'd found, his mind raced with questions. Why had his father built a system that could recognize him? Was he out there somewhere, watching through the code? And most importantly, what was Project Legacy, and why did it seem to know who he was? The answers were out there, hidden in the digital labyrinth of quantum tech solutions. But as Casimir was beginning to understand, finding those answers might be the easiest part. The real challenge would be dealing with what they revealed. As the last bits of data transferred to his mother's device, a final message flashed across his screen. "Sometimes the best way to protect something is to hide it in plain sight. Keep looking, little coder, but remember, not all who watch are friends." The system closed down, leaving Casimir's screens dark, except for his normal desktop display. But something had fundamentally changed. The digital world that had always felt like home now held new meaning. It wasn't just a playground anymore, but a path that might lead him to the truth about his father. Rain continued to fall outside their window, but Casimir barely noticed it now. His mind was already racing ahead, plotting ways to unravel this new mystery. He'd found his first real clue, and with it, a purpose that went beyond mere curiosity. Somewhere in the vast digital landscape, Grayson Finlow was leaving a trail for his son to follow, and Casimir Ambrosia, at just 5 years old, was about to embark on the most important hack of his young life, one that would unravel not just code, but the very fabric of his family's carefully guarded secrets. Chapter 4. Digital Breadcrumbs. Dawn crept over Seattle's skyline, painting the perpetual clouds in shades of lavender and pearl. Casimir hadn't slept. For the past 14 hours, he'd been immersed in the data they'd extracted from quantum tech systems, his young mind processing patterns that would baffle most adult programmers. Ambrosia had tried to send him to bed 3 times, but eventually gave up, choosing instead to keep vigil from her own workstation across the room. The encrypted file labeled Project Legacy pulsed on his center screen like a digital heartbeat. They'd managed to download it during their exploration of quantum tech systems, but it wasn't like normal encrypted files. This one seemed to change every time they looked at it, its protection protocols shifting like sand in a desert wind. "Mom," Casimir called out softly, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Remember those puzzles you used to give me, the ones you said were special?" Ambrosia looked up from her monitors, dark circles under her eyes matching her son's. "The encryption exercises. You said they came from—" He hesitated, still uncertain about speaking of his father directly. "You said they were family puzzles." She wheeled her chair closer, her curls wild from running her fingers through them in frustration. "They were your father's teaching tools. He believed that the best way to learn encryption was to make it personal." Casimir nodded, his small fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up 2 windows side by side. "Look at this. The encryption pattern in Project Legacy, it's almost identical to those puzzles, but it's been evolved, like it's learned and grown over time." Ambrosia leaned forward, her eyes widening as she recognized the familiar structure hidden beneath layers of advanced cryptography. It's his signature nested encryption, but he's added something new. Quantum variables, Casimir finished, excitement creeping into his tired voice. The encryption key changes based on who's trying to access it. That's why it looks different every time we scan it. It's reading us somehow. The implications hit Ambrosia like a physical force. Grayson had always theorized about encryption that could recognize specific users based on their interaction patterns, but this was far beyond what should be possible. Unless... The genetic signature, she whispered, pieces clicking into place. Casimir, pull up your coding pattern analysis from yesterday. His fingers blurred across the keys, bringing up multiple windows of scrolling code. Side by side, they could see three distinct but related patterns. Casimir's natural coding style, the base encryption of Project Legacy, and the original puzzles Ambrosia had saved from Grayson. It's like DNA, Casimir breathed, his hazel eyes reflecting the dancing code. Each pattern is unique, but they share common elements. And look, he highlighted a section of repeating code. These segments are exactly the same in all three, like genetic markers. Ambrosia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Grayson had encoded their son's genetic pattern into his security system years before Casimir was born, creating a digital inheritance that could only be claimed by their child. He knew, she said softly, her hand reaching out to stroke Casimir's curls. Somehow, he knew you'd be like him, that you'd find this. A new window suddenly popped up on Casimir's screen, displaying a simple message. Genetic key recognized, initiating personal protocols. Welcome home, little coder. The Project Legacy file began to transform, its encryption peeling away layer by layer like a digital flower blooming in accelerated time. But instead of revealing its contents all at once, it seemed to be creating a path, each decoded segment leading to another puzzle. "Mom!" Casimir said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I think it wants us to follow it." The first decoded section contained what looked like a normal email, dated 5 years ago, around the time Grayson had disappeared. But hidden within the ordinary business language were patterns that Casimir immediately recognized from his encryption exercises. "It's a cipher key," he explained, fingers already moving to decode it. "But it's not just random. The patterns, they're like the lullaby you sing to me. The one you said was special." Ambrosia's breath caught. The lullaby had been Grayson's creation, a melody he'd written for their unborn child, then encoded into a digital sequence. She'd converted it back to music, never telling Casimir its true origin. As they watched, the decoded message revealed coordinates and another encrypted file name. But more importantly, it contained a personal message, hidden so deeply in the code that only someone with both Grayson's teaching and Casimir's natural talent could have found it. "To my son, who I knew would understand the music in the mathematics. Your mother carries half the key in a pendant she thinks I don't know she kept. Together, you are the decryption I trusted would someday exist. But be careful. The path I've laid is watched by others who would use your gifts for their own purposes. Trust the code, but verify the source. Some puzzles are traps in disguise." Casimir looked up at his mother, questions burning in his eyes. Ambrosia was already reaching for the USB drive pendant she always wore, her hands shaking slightly as she unclasped it. "He knew," she repeated, staring at the small device. "All this time, he was planning for this moment." They connected the pendant to Casimir's system, and immediately new patterns began emerging in the Project Legacy file. The encryption responded to the combined presence of Casimir's coding signature and the data from the pendant, revealing deeper layers of hidden information. But as more data emerged, So did warnings. Embedded in the code were signs of active surveillance, traces of other entities trying to track the file's access. Grayson had left them a trail of breadcrumbs, but they weren't the only ones following it. "Someone's watching," Casimir noted, his young face serious as he monitored the incoming connection attempts. "Multiple systems are trying to trace our location." Ambrosia was already moving, activating their emergency protocols. "Your father wouldn't have left these warnings without reason. We need to be careful how we proceed." But Casimir's attention was caught by something else, a fragment of code that seemed out of place in the project files. It was a small subroutine, elegant in its simplicity, that contained what looked like a child's game. "Mom, look at this," he called, pulling up the segment. "It's some kind of puzzle game, but the patterns, they're teaching something. Advanced encryption algorithms, but disguised as a game." Ambrosia leaned in, her expression softening as she recognized Grayson's style. "He built this for you," she said quietly. "Even before you were born, he was creating ways to teach you, to help you understand." The game seemed simple at first, guiding a digital sprite through mazes of code. But as Casimir played, his natural talent allowing him to progress quickly, they realized it was actually a training program. Each level taught new encryption techniques, building complexity while maintaining the playful facade. "The next piece of Project Legacy is hidden inside the game," Casimir realized, his fingers dancing across the keys as he worked through the levels. "He's not just leaving us a trail, he's making sure I'm ready for what we'll find at the end." As the Seattle morning fully bloomed outside their window, mother and son remained fixed at their stations, following the digital breadcrumbs left by a man who had seen far enough into the future to prepare for this moment. The path ahead was dangerous, filled with traps and watchers, but it was also a father's gift to his son, a way to connect across years of separation through the language they both understood best. The next level of the game loaded, and Casimir settled in, his young mind already processing the patterns, finding the hidden lessons in his father's digital legacy. Somewhere out there, Grayson Finlow was waiting, and every puzzle solved brought them one step closer to understanding why he'd had to leave and what he'd been protecting all these years. Behind them, the sun finally broke through Seattle's clouds, casting long shadows across their workstations. But Casimir barely noticed, too absorbed in the digital treasure hunt that was slowly revealing not just code, but the story of his family, hidden in the elegant mathematics of his father's creation. Chapter 5. The Other Side. Grayson Finlow's corner office on the 47th floor of Quantum Tech Solutions offered a panoramic view of downtown Seattle, but he rarely noticed it anymore. His world existed primarily in the digital realm, where ones and zeros danced across multiple holographic displays that surrounded his workstation like a technological cocoon. The space looked more like a command center than a typical executive office, with state-of-the-art equipment that wouldn't be available to the public for years. Tonight, like most nights, he sat alone in the blue glow of his monitors, the city lights twinkling far below like distant stars. His sandy brown hair had grown lighter over the years, touched with strands of silver that matched the steel in his green eyes. The past 5 years had aged him more than the previous 15 combined, each day of separation from his family, etching new lines around his eyes and mouth. A subtle alert flashed across his primary screen, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But Grayson had been waiting for this moment for 5 years, 3 months, and 14 days. His heart began to race as he pulled up the security logs. Anomalous access pattern detected location, encrypted timestamp. 2:47:13 PST signature analysis processing. His fingers flew across the haptic interface, bringing up multiple windows of scrolling data. The intrusion was unlike anything he'd seen before, or rather, exactly like something he'd seen before. His own code, but evolved, refined, with an elegance that made his breath catch. "It's you," he whispered to the empty office, watching the pattern analysis complete. "You found it." The coding signature matched his own base patterns by 98.7%, an impossible figure unless the coder shared his exact thought processes, his precise way of seeing the digital world. Only someone sharing his DNA could achieve such a match. A second alert appeared. Project Legacy, genetic key. Detected parental match confirmed. Subject Casimir Ambrosia. Age 5 years, 4 months, 12 days. Grayson's hands trembled as he pulled up the live feed of the intrusion. His son, the child he'd never held, never seen except in encrypted photographs smuggled through secure channels, was dancing through his security systems with an intuitive grace that surpassed even his wildest hopes. "You're even more brilliant than I imagined," he breathed, watching as Casimir navigated the complex security protocols. The boy wasn't just breaking through the firewalls, he was appreciating them, admiring their structure, even as he found their hidden weaknesses. A third window opened automatically, displaying a video feed from what appeared to be a child's bedroom. Grayson had designed his security systems to activate cellular cameras near any access points, but he hadn't expected this. A small boy, with wild curls falling into his eyes, looking so much like Ambrosia, but with Grayson's focused expression as he worked. "Sir?" a voice called from the doorway, making Grayson quickly minimize the video feed. Dr. Elena Xavier, his head of security, stood there with a concerned expression. The overnight team detected some unusual activity in the Project Legacy servers. Grayson forced his features into a mask of professional interest. "Oh? Anything concerning?" Elena stepped into the office, her high heels silent on the thick carpet. She was brilliant and dangerous in equal measure, one of the few people who might be able to recognize what was really happening in their systems. "The patterns are familiar," she said carefully, studying his face. "Very familiar. Almost like looking at your early work, but with some fascinating evolutionary leaps." Grayson kept his expression neutral as he pulled up a sanitized version of the security logs. "Show me what's caught your attention." Elena leaned over his desk, her perfectly manicured finger pointing to specific code sequences. "Here and here. The encryption bypasses are elegant, almost playful, and look at the timestamp patterns. They suggest a young mind, someone who hasn't learned to mask their natural rhythms yet." A chill ran down Grayson's spine. She was too close to the truth. "An interesting theory. Perhaps one of our competitors has developed a new AI system." "Perhaps," Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Or perhaps something more interesting is happening. The board has always wondered about your insistence on genetic coding markers in our security protocols. It seemed excessive, even for you." Grayson's hand moved imperceptibly toward the small red button hidden under his desk, the panic switch that would trigger his own set of emergency protocols. "The human element in coding is my specialty, Dr. Xavier. You know this." "Indeed." She straightened up, smoothing her impeccable suit. "Just like I know that exactly 5 years, 3 months, and 14 days ago, you completely rewrote our core security systems, the same time that brilliant young quantum encryption specialist disappeared from Boston. What was her name again? Ambrosia something?" The air in the office grew thick with tension. Through his peripheral vision, Grayson could see his son still working on the screens he'd minimized, getting closer to the heart of Project Legacy with each passing moment. "Is there something specific you need from me, Elena?" he asked, his voice carrying a warning edge. She smiled again, reaching into her jacket to withdraw a small device. "Actually, there is. The board has asked me to investigate certain anomalies in your recent work. They're particularly interested in these genetic signatures we've detected tonight." Grayson's finger hovered over the panic button. In the minimized window, he could see Casimir accessing the first layers of Project Legacy. He needed to buy time to let his son find what he'd hidden there. "The board authorized this investigation?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Let's say they will, once they see what I've found." Elena placed the device on his desk. A 5-year-old hacker, Grayson? Really? And not just any child, but one whose genetic signature matches yours perfectly. One whose coding style shows clear inheritance patterns from both you and Ms. Hendry's work. The device on his desk blinked red, and Grayson's screens suddenly froze. Eleanor had brought her own security measures. "The question is," she continued, "what's so important in Project Legacy that you'd risk everything to pass it on to a child? What are you really protecting?" Grayson's mind raced through scenarios, each one more desperate than the last. He needed 13 more minutes, just 13 minutes for Casimir to reach the core files and trigger the automated protocols he'd built into the system. "You've always been too clever for your own good, Elena," he said quietly, his finger still poised over the panic button. "But you're asking questions better left unanswered." "Oh, I think they need to be answered." She pulled out her phone, presumably to contact her team. "In fact, I've already dispatched a security detail to a certain apartment in the Belltown district. Somewhere a brilliant little boy is probably up past his bedtime, playing with things he shouldn't." Grayson's blood ran cold. "You don't want to do this, Elena. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess." "That's exactly what I'm counting on." She smiled, but this time it was predatory. "Whatever you discovered, whatever you've hidden in Project Legacy, it's worth more than all of us combined. And now, thanks to your son's impressive display tonight, we finally have a way to access it." In the minimized window, Grayson could see Casimir's progress bar, 89% complete on the core file transfer. He just needed a few more minutes. "Think about what you're doing," he warned, rising slowly from his chair. "That boy is 5 years old. That boy is perhaps the most valuable intellectual property on the planet. A perfect fusion of your genius and Ambrosia Hendry's quantum encryption breakthroughs, the ultimate key to Project Legacy." Elena's phone buzzed. "Ah, my team is in position. Shall we go meet your son together?" Grayson's hand moved away from the panic button, reaching instead for a small quantum processor chip embedded in his watch. "You know what your mistake was, Elena?" She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Do tell." "You assumed I'd wait 5 years without planning for exactly this moment." He pressed the chip, and every screen in the office suddenly blazed to life, displaying the same message. "Quantum entanglement protocols, activated system purge, initiated emergency measures, deployed." Elena lunged for her device, but it was too late. The quantum encryption Grayson had embedded throughout Quantum Tech systems was unfolding like a digital flower, each petal erasing and rewriting critical sections of code. "What have you done?" she demanded, watching as years of research began to dissolve. "I've made sure that Project Legacy will only ever belong to those who understand its true value," Grayson said calmly, even as alarms began blaring throughout the building. A father's gift to his son, protected by love rather than greed. In the chaos that followed, as security systems crashed and emergency protocols engaged, Grayson allowed himself one last look at the minimized window showing his son. Casimir's face was lit with triumph as the final pieces of Project Legacy transferred to his system, protected by encryption that only he would ever be able to break. "Take care of it, little coder," Grayson whispered, even as smoke began filling his office from the fail-safe charges he'd planted years ago. "The future is in your hands now." The night sky above Seattle lit up with the electronic pulse that followed, but by then, both Grayson Finlow and the true heart of Project Legacy were long gone, leaving behind only digital whispers for those who knew how to listen. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The morning news blazed across every screen in their Seattle apartment. Quantum Tech Solutions suffers catastrophic system failure. CEO Grayson Finlow missing. Ambrosia stood frozen before the holographic display, her coffee cup forgotten in her trembling hand as she watched footage of the company's headquarters, now dark and silent in the morning light. Behind her, Casimir sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by tablets displaying fragments of Project Legacy's code. He hadn't slept since the incident, his young mind working overtime to process not just the complex algorithms he'd downloaded, but the implications of what had happened during that late-night connection. "Mom," he called softly, his voice carrying a maturity that made her heart ache. "I think I understand why he left us now." Ambrosia set down her coffee and moved to join her son on the floor. The morning sun caught her dark curls, highlighting the few strands of silver that had appeared in the past 5 years. She reached for the quantum-encrypted tablet that held the core files of Project Legacy. "What did you find, Sunshine?" "It's not just code," Casimir explained, his small fingers dancing across the screen. "Look at these pattern structures. They're like memories, but written in mathematics. Dad wasn't just building a security system. He was creating a way to protect something bigger." Ambrosia closed her eyes, memories washing over her like digital rain. "I suppose it's time you knew the whole truth," she said quietly. "About Boston, about why we've been running, about what your father discovered." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small quantum chip, one she'd kept hidden since the day Grayson had pressed it into her palm in that Boston apartment. This is where it all began. As she inserted the chip into their secure system, the screens around them came alive with archived data. News reports, research papers, and classified documents began filling the displays. "5 years ago, your father was working on something revolutionary at MIT's quantum computing lab," Ambrosia began, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "He called it consciousness encryption, a way to encode human memories and experiences directly into quantum data structures." Casimir's eyes widened as he processed this information, like downloading someone's brain. "More than that," Ambrosia corrected, pulling up one of Grayson's original research papers. "He found a way to encode not just memories, but the essence of how someone thinks, their problem-solving patterns, their creative processes, everything that makes them uniquely them." She gestured to the code fragments Casimir had been studying. "That's why Project Legacy's security system could recognize you. Your father encoded his own cognitive patterns into it, along with markers from my quantum encryption work. He created a system that could only be fully accessed by someone who thought like both of us." "By me," Casimir whispered, understanding dawning in his eyes. Ambrosia nodded, tears threatening to spill. But he discovered something else during his research, something dangerous. The same technology that could preserve human consciousness could also be used to override it. In the wrong hands, it could become the ultimate tool for control. The screens around them shifted, showing heavily redacted government documents and corporate communications. "Certain people became very interested in your father's work. They saw the potential for something horrible, a way to rewrite human consciousness itself." Casimir's fingers moved across his tablet, pulling up the core files he'd downloaded from Quantum Tech. "That's why the security is so complex. He's not just protecting data, he's protecting humanity's free will," Ambrosia finished. "When he realized what they wanted to do with his research, he knew he had to hide it. But by then, I was already pregnant with you, and they were watching us closely." She pulled up another file, a video she'd kept encrypted all these years. In it, a younger Grayson paced their Boston apartment, his face drawn with worry. "They're closing in," his recorded voice said. "I've hidden the core research in a quantum maze of my own design, but they're getting closer. The only way to protect you both is to make them think I'm still developing it, still working toward their goals. I have to leave, have to keep their attention focused on me. The recording showed him kneeling before Ambrosia, his hand resting gently on her stomach where Casimir grew. Our child will have both our gifts, your quantum intuition and my pattern recognition. When the time comes, only someone with that unique combination will be able to understand and protect what I've hidden. Casimir sat back, his young face thoughtful as pieces clicked into place. The games you taught me, the puzzles, they weren't just lessons, were they? They were preparation. Ambrosia confirmed. Your father knew that someday you'd be ready to understand his work, to see past the encryption to what he was really protecting. But he also knew you'd need to be ready for what that understanding would bring. A new alert flashed across their screens, a news update about quantum tech. The company's board of directors was announcing an emergency restructuring, with Dr. Elena Xavier stepping in as interim CEO. We need to move quickly, Ambrosia said, already rising to activate their emergency protocols. What happened at Quantum Tech wasn't an accident. Your father is sending us a message. It's not safe here anymore. Casimir was already packing his equipment, his movements practiced from years of sudden relocations. But this time was different. This time they weren't just running from shadows. They were running toward something, toward someone. "Mom!" he called as she began systematically erasing their digital footprint from the apartment systems. "In the project legacy files, there's something else, something hidden beneath all the other encryption. I think Dad left us a map." Ambrosia paused, turning to look at her son. In that moment she saw both herself and Grayson reflected in his determined expression. A map to what, Sunshine? To him, Casimir said simply, pulling up a complex series of quantum coordinates. But we'll have to solve it together. The encryption, it needs both of us, just like he planned. Outside, sirens began wailing in the distance, drawing closer to their building. Ambrosia quickly gathered their essential equipment, while Casimir transferred their critical data to quantum-secured drives. The sun had fully risen over Seattle now, painting the city in shades of gold and promise. They had lived in the shadows for 5 years, running from a truth too dangerous to face. But now, armed with Project Legacy's secrets and the combined brilliance of their family's gifts, they were ready to step into the light and find their way back to Grayson. As they slipped out of the apartment through their pre-planned escape route, Casimir clutched his tablet containing the downloaded files. Somewhere in that quantum maze of code and consciousness lay the path to his father. A path that only a child with both his parents' gifts could ever hope to follow. The game of shadows was ending. The real journey was about to begin. Chapter 7. The chase Seattle's evening rain turned the city streets into rivers of neon reflection as Ambrosia guided Casimir through the maze of downtown alleyways. Their emergency bags bounced against their backs, containing only the essentials. Quantum-encrypted laptops, portable servers, and a few precious personal items they couldn't bear to leave behind. Movement on the northwest corner, Casimir whispered, his eyes fixed on the small holographic display projected from his wrist device, another of his father's creations, found hidden in the Project Legacy files and fabricated just weeks ago. The device showed a real-time map of the city, overlaid with heat signatures and digital traces, allowing them to track the quantum tech security teams pursuing them. "Good eyes, Sunshine," Ambrosia murmured, smoothly changing their direction to head east instead. "Keep watching those patterns." They ducked into a service entrance of the Pike Place Market, now closed for the night. The historic building's lack of modern security systems made it a perfect blind spot in the city's surveillance network. Ambrosia had chosen their apartment's location specifically for its proximity to such digital shadows. "Mom," Casimir called softly as they navigated through the dark market halls. The signature tracking program is picking up something strange. Look at this pattern. They paused behind a flower stall, and Ambrosia leaned down to study her son's display. Among the dozen or so heat signatures pursuing them, one stood out. Its digital footprint was encrypted in a way that seemed hauntingly familiar. "That's not possible," she breathed, recognizing the signature pattern. "That's your father's encryption style, but it's been modified, evolved." "Like he's been watching us all along," Casimir finished, his young face illuminated by the holographic glow. "Mom, I don't think we're the only ones running tonight." A noise from the market's main entrance sent them deeper into the shadows. Through the gaps between stalls, they could see figures moving with military precision, their advanced tech gear glowing softly in the darkness. "Doctor! Hendry!" a woman's voice called out, the sound echoing through the empty market. "There's no need to keep running. We just want to talk about Project Legacy." Ambrosia's hand tightened on Casimir's shoulder. She recognized that voice. Dr. Elena Xavier, the woman who had tried to steal Grayson's research 5 years ago in Boston. "The quantum maze has already been triggered," Elena continued, her footsteps drawing closer. "Your son's access to the system initiated protocols we've been waiting years to study. Why not work together to understand what Grayson created?" Casimir looked up at his mother, his hazel eyes reflecting the same determination she'd so often seen in Grayson's. Without speaking, he pulled up another window on his holographic display, showing the complex quantum calculations he'd been running in the background. "Dad's signature," he whispered, pointing to a specific pattern. "It's not just watching, it's leading somewhere. Look at the progression." Ambrosia's eyes widened as she studied the data. The encrypted signature they'd detected wasn't just observing their movement, it was creating a path, adjusting security cameras, traffic signals, and building systems to clear a route through the city. "He's helping us escape," she realized, her heart racing. "Even now, he's still protecting us." A sudden burst of light from above made them duck deeper into the shadows. Quantum tech drones had taken up position over the market's skylight, their scanning beams cutting through the darkness. "Time to move, Sunshine," Ambrosia whispered. "Your father's showing us the way. Let's not waste his effort." They slipped through a maintenance door and down into the market's underground level, where Seattle's historic streets lay buried beneath the modern city. Casimir's display showed their pursuers' positions in real time, while also highlighting the path being cleared ahead of them through the city's infrastructure. "The signature's getting stronger," Casimir noted, as they emerged from a century-old tunnel into a modern parking garage. "Whatever system Dad's using to help us, we're getting closer to its source." A sleek black car sat waiting in a corner spot, its quantum signature matching the encryption pattern they'd been following. On its windshield, a simple message glowed in Grayson's distinctive coding style. "For my family, when the time comes." "He knew," Ambrosia whispered, reading the manufacturing date on the vehicle's display. "He planted this here 3 years ago, just waiting for tonight." The car's security system recognized their combined biometric signatures. Another piece of Grayson's long-term planning. As they quickly got in, the vehicle's quantum computers came alive, integrating with Casimir's holographic display and Ambrosia's emergency protocols. "Multiple vehicles entering the structure," Casimir reported, watching the pursuit patterns. "They're trying to box us in." Ambrosia's hands moved confidently over the car's controls, bringing its advanced systems online. "Your father wouldn't have left this for us without a plan. Look deeper into those systems, Sunshine. What else did he hide here?" Casimir's fingers flew across the holographic interfaces that had sprung up around the passenger seat. "There's something. It's like the car has its own version of Project Legacy built in, a quantum navigation system I've never seen before." The garage echoed with the sound of screeching tires as quantum tech vehicles appeared at every exit. Elena's voice came over their pursuers' loudspeakers. "You're only delaying the inevitable, Ambrosia. Project Legacy belongs to everyone, not just your family." "No," Casimir said firmly, his young voice carrying the weight of understanding beyond his years. "It belongs to those who understand its real purpose." His hands moved in a complex pattern across the interfaces, implementing encryption protocols that seemed to flow naturally from his consciousness to the car's systems. The vehicle responded instantly, its quantum computers synchronizing with his commands in a way that felt almost alive. "Hold on," Ambrosia warned as the car's systems came fully online. The vehicle moved with impossible precision, threading through gaps in the pursuing forces as if guided by something more than just programming. Through the rear windows, Casimir could see Eleanor watching their escape, her expression visible in the glow of the quantum trackers she held. But what caught his attention was the figure standing in the shadows behind her, a man whose stance and bearing seemed hauntingly familiar. "Dad," he whispered. But there was no time to be sure. Their car was already accelerating up the garage ramps, its quantum systems interfacing with the city's infrastructure to clear their path. As they emerged onto Seattle's rain-slick streets, Ambrosia glanced at her son's displays. "Where's the signature leading us?" Casimir studied the quantum navigation system, watching as new patterns emerged. "East," he said confidently, "toward the mountains. And Mom, I think I know why. The encryption Dad used in these systems, it's not just for navigation. He's left something for us out there, something that will explain everything." Their pursuers fell behind as the car demonstrated capabilities that shouldn't have been possible, moving through the city's traffic like water flowing through stones. Above them, quantum tech drones tried to maintain visual contact, but the vehicle's quantum field disrupted their tracking systems. "Your father," Ambrosia said softly as they crossed the floating bridge over Lake Washington, "always said that the best place to hide something was in plain sight, that sometimes the most secure location was the one no one would think to look for." Casimir nodded, his eyes fixed on the quantum navigation display as it revealed their destination, a location deep in the Cascade Mountains. "The cabin in the surveillance footage," he realized. "The one where you first met Dad. That's where we're going, isn't it?" "Where it all began," Ambrosia confirmed, her hands steady on the controls as they left the city lights behind. "And maybe where it all comes together again." Behind them, Seattle's glow faded into the rainy darkness, but Casimir's displays showed that they weren't alone in their journey. That familiar encrypted signature was still there, moving parallel to their route through different systems and networks. Whether it was his father's direct presence or an echo he'd left to guide them, they couldn't be sure. What they did know was that tonight had changed everything. They were no longer running from the past. They were racing toward a future that Grayson had spent 5 years preparing for them to find. As their quantum-enhanced vehicle carried them into the mountain darkness, Casimir felt something he'd never experienced before. The sense that all the code he'd ever written, all the patterns he'd ever studied, had been leading him to this moment, to this night, to the truth about his father and the legacy he'd left behind. The chase wasn't ending. In many ways, it was just beginning. Chapter 8. Safehouse Secrets. The cabin materialized out of the pre-dawn mist, like a digital artifact rendering into reality. Nestled high in the Cascade Mountains, its exterior appeared deliberately weathered, disguising the cutting-edge technology hidden within its walls. Snow dusted the solar panel roof, and quantum dampening fields made the structure almost invisible to modern scanning systems. Ambrosia's hands trembled slightly as she pressed her palm to the ancient-looking wooden door. A hidden scanner hummed beneath the weathered surface, reading not just her biometric data, but the unique quantum signature of her neural patterns. something only Grayson would have thought to include. "Welcome home, Ambrosia," whispered a familiar voice as the door clicked open. Grayson's voice, preserved in the house's systems, brought tears to her eyes. Casimir stepped inside, his young face filled with wonder as the cabin's interior came to life around them. Holographic displays emerged from seemingly solid walls, and hidden panels revealed state-of-the-art computing stations. The rustic exterior was merely camouflage for what amounted to a quantum computing fortress. "This is where it all started," Ambrosia said softly, running her hand along a wooden beam that concealed fiber-optic cables. "Your father and I spent 6 months here, developing the initial frameworks for Project Legacy. We thought we were going to change the world." "You did change it," Casimir replied, already settling into one of the workstations, his fingers dancing across holographic keys, just not in the way you expected. The cabin's systems recognized Casimir immediately, adapting their interfaces to accommodate his smaller size and preferred configuration. Grayson had prepared for this too, designing child-sized equipment that had waited years for his son's arrival. "Mom!" Casimir called out, his voice tight with excitement. "Look at this! The cabin's quantum core. It's got Dad's original research notes. Everything about Project Legacy from the beginning." Ambrosia moved to join him, her heart racing as familiar codes scrolled across the screens. "This is where your father first discovered the possibility of consciousness encryption. We were working on quantum security protocols when he noticed something unusual in the pattern recognition algorithms." She pulled up an archived video file showing a younger version of herself and Grayson working late into the night. Their expressions were animated as they discussed something on their screens, finishing each other's sentences and building on each other's ideas. "The human brain," recorded Grayson was saying, "doesn't just process information, it creates unique patterns in how it processes that information. If we could map those patterns, encrypt them, we could create security systems that recognize not just what someone knows," recorded Ambrosia finished, "but how they think." Casimir watched the video intently, studying his father's mannerisms, the way he moved his hands when explaining complex concepts, gestures the boy himself had somehow inherited without ever seeing them. But that was just the beginning. Present-day Ambrosia continued, accessing deeper levels of the archived data. "Your father realized that if you could encrypt consciousness, you could theoretically decrypt it too, transfer it, maybe even alter it. That's why they wanted his research," Casimir said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They could use it to change how people think." "Not just change their thoughts," Ambrosia corrected, pulling up more of Grayson's notes. "Change who they are at their core, rewrite their fundamental patterns of consciousness." The cabin's systems hummed around them as they dug deeper into the archives. Outside, snow began to fall more heavily, providing additional cover from any pursuing forces. But inside, mother and son were discovering layers of truth that had been waiting years to be revealed. "There's something else," Casimir said suddenly, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Look at these subroutines in the cabin's security system. They're not just protecting us, they're collecting data, learning." Ambrosia leaned closer, her expertise in quantum encryption recognizing patterns she hadn't seen in years. "Your father turned the cabin into more than a safe house. It's a development environment for Project Legacy itself. The system is still evolving, still growing. And look at this," Casimir pointed to a cascading sequence of code. "These are the same patterns I found in quantum tech systems, but more advanced. Dad's been using the cabin to continue his research, testing new iterations of the consciousness encryption." A soft chime interrupted their investigation. As the cabin's environmental systems adjusted to their presence, the temperature rising slightly to combat the mountain chill. But beneath that everyday function, something else was happening. The quantum core was responding to their combined presence, recognizing the unique pattern created by their paired consciousness signatures. "Casimir," Ambrosia said slowly, watching the system's response. "Pull up your Project Legacy access protocols. I think your father left something special here, something that needed both of us to activate." The boy's fingers moved swiftly across the interface, implementing the unique combination of his and his mother's encryption styles that had allowed them to access the project's core files. The cabin's systems responded immediately, holographic displays shifting to reveal new layers of hidden data. A message appeared, written in Grayson's distinctive coding style. "My beloved family, if you're seeing this, then everything and nothing has gone according to plan. The cabin's quantum core contains the true heart of Project Legacy, not a weapon or a tool for control, but a gift, a way to preserve what makes us human in an increasingly digital world. Casimir, my son, your ability to find this place proves what I always believed, that consciousness itself can be inherited, that the patterns of how we think can be passed down just like the color of our eyes or the curve of our smile. You are the key to completing what your mother and I began here. Together you can unlock the final phase of Project Legacy. But be careful. Others are watching, waiting. Trust the code, but more importantly, trust each other. Everything you need is already within you both." The message faded, leaving behind complex sequences of quantum encryption that seemed to pulse with life itself. Casimir and Ambrosia shared a look of understanding. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were part of something larger, something that had been in motion since before Casimir was born. As night fell over the mountain, mother and son settled into the cabin's rhythm, their fingers moving in synchronization across multiple interfaces as they began to unravel the deeper mysteries Grayson had left for them. Outside, snow continued to fall, masking their location from the world. But inside, surrounded by quantum computers and their father's legacy, they were more visible than ever to the one person who mattered most. Somewhere in the digital shadows, Grayson Finlow watched through his encrypted connections as his family began to understand the true nature of his life's work. The real question wasn't whether they would crack the final encryption, it was whether they would be ready for what they found when they did. The safe house had kept its secrets for 5 years. Now, in the presence of those it was built to protect, it was finally ready to reveal its true purpose. Chapter 9. The Enemy Within. Grayson Finlow stood in his private lab deep within Quantum Tech's sub-basement, surrounded by quantum processors that hummed like electronic honeybees. The screens around him displayed real-time data from the cabin's security systems, showing him Ambrosia and Casimir as they worked to unravel his encrypted messages. His heart ached watching them, but his expression remained focused. He had discovered something that changed everything. "You're running out of time, Grayson," called a voice from the doorway. Elena Xavier stepped into the lab, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "The board is getting impatient. They want results." But Grayson barely heard her. His attention was fixed on a pattern he'd discovered buried deep in Quantum Tech's secure servers, a shadow program that had been running undetected for months, slowly corrupting the consciousness encryption protocols he'd developed. "Someone's been modifying the base code," he said quietly, bringing up multiple windows of data. "Not just studying it, weaponizing it." Elena moved closer, her reflection ghosting across the dark screens. "Isn't that what we've been working toward? The military applications alone—" "No!" Grayson cut her off, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "This is different. Look at these patterns." He highlighted a sequence of code that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. What had originally been designed to protect human consciousness was being twisted into something that could override it completely. The implications made his blood run cold. The consciousness encryption was meant to preserve free will, not destroy it, he continued, pulling up more evidence. But someone inside quantum tech has been developing a way to use it for mass control. They're building a digital cage for the human mind. Elena's expression remained carefully neutral, but Grayson caught a flicker of something in her eyes. He'd known her for years, trusted her as his head of security, but suddenly he was seeing her in a new light. "How long?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Since Boston," she replied calmly. "Since you first discovered the possibility of consciousness transfer. Did you really think you could keep something this powerful to yourself, Grayson?" His screens suddenly went dark, and warning alerts began flashing across his security interfaces. Elena held up a small quantum device, its core pulsing with malicious intent. "The board didn't just want your research," she continued. "They wanted your mind, your unique way of seeing patterns in the chaos. Why do you think we let you hide your family all these years? We needed you focused, productive, and now that your son has proven the hereditary nature of consciousness patterns, we have everything we need." Grayson's hand moved slowly toward his emergency protocol switch, but Elena's laugh stopped him. "Don't bother," she smiled. "We've already locked down all your escape routes. The only question is whether you'll help us willingly or whether we'll have to use more direct methods." But Grayson wasn't looking at her anymore. His attention was fixed on one of his quantum displays, where a familiar pattern had just emerged. Through the cabin systems, he could see Casimir implementing an encryption sequence that mirrored his own thoughts perfectly. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said softly. "Consciousness isn't just patterns of thought. It's the essence of what makes us human. Try to control it, and you risk destroying everything that makes life worth living." "Such dramatics," Elena sighed. "You're a scientist, Grayson. You know that everything can be reduced to code, even human nature. We're simply taking the next step in evolution." More alerts began flashing as quantum tech security teams moved into position throughout the building. But Grayson remained calm, watching his son's work through the quantum link to the cabin. "You made one crucial mistake," he said, straightening up to face her. "You assumed that because you could track my family, you knew everything about them. But there's something about consciousness patterns that you missed, something beautiful." His fingers moved in a precise sequence across his quantum interface, implementing protocols he'd hidden years ago. Around them, the lab systems began to pulse with new energy. When two consciousness patterns are perfectly aligned, like mine and my son's, they create something greater than themselves, a resonance that can't be predicted or controlled. Eleanor's device sparked and died as new patterns emerged in the quantum field around them. Through his screens, Grayson could see Casimir and Ambrosia working in perfect synchronization, their combined consciousness patterns creating encryption sequences that even he hadn't imagined possible. "What have you done?" Elena demanded, watching as her carefully laid plans began to unravel. "I showed my son the truth," Grayson smiled. "Not just about the technology, but about who we are, what we can become when we work together instead of trying to control each other." The lab's quantum processors began overloading as consciousness patterns from the cabin interfaced with quantum tech systems. Elena rushed to her communication device, barking orders to her security teams, but it was too late. Project Legacy was never about the technology, Grayson continued, watching as his son's work began systematically dismantling the corrupt code that had infected the company's systems. It was about protecting what makes us human, our ability to choose, to love, to grow. Alarms began blaring throughout the building as security systems crashed and emergency protocols engaged. But through it all, Grayson stood calmly at his station, his screens showing him his family's work at the cabin. "You see, Elena," he said softly, You can't control consciousness any more than you can control love. You can only nurture it, protect it, and hope it grows into something beautiful. The quantum processors reached critical levels as Casimir's inheritance, not just of Grayson's coding ability, but of his fundamental way of seeing the world, proved more powerful than any security system or corporate control. As chaos erupted around them, Grayson allowed himself a moment of pure pride. His son had not only found his way through the quantum maze, but had understood its true purpose. Now, as quantum tech's corrupted systems crashed around them, a new path was emerging, one that would protect not just his family, but the very essence of human consciousness itself. The enemy within had revealed itself, but so had the solution, in the combined consciousness patterns of a family that refused to be controlled or separated. The real question was no longer about who would win this battle, but about what would emerge from its ashes. The future of human consciousness hung in the balance, but Grayson had never felt more confident. In his son's hands, Project Legacy would become what it was always meant to be, not a tool for control, but a guardian of human free will. Now he just had to survive long enough to see it happen. Chapter 10. Code of Honor. The cabin's quantum processors pulsed with an ethereal blue glow as Casimir worked through the night, his small fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with inherited grace. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Cascade Mountains loomed like silent guardians, their peaks illuminated by a full moon that seemed to hang impossibly close. "There's something here," he murmured, his eyes reflecting cascading lines of code. "Something in the way Dad structured these encryption patterns. Mom, look at this." Ambrosia moved from her own workstation, her hand resting gently on her son's shoulder as she studied his screens. The code sequences he'd discovered were unlike anything they'd seen before, a perfect fusion of mathematics and music, logic and love. "It's the lullaby," she breathed, recognition dawning in her eyes. "The one I used to sing to you. Your father. He encoded it into Project Legacy's core protocols." Casimir's fingers hesitated over the keys as the familiar melody emerged from the patterns. Every night of his life, Ambrosia had sung him this song, her voice carrying mathematical mysteries he was only now beginning to understand. "But it's more than just music," he said, pulling up multiple analysis windows. "Look at how the patterns shift and flow. It's like it's waiting for something. A response." In his private lab at Quantum Tech, Grayson Finlow watched through secure quantum channels as his son unraveled the puzzle he'd spent years perfecting. Despite the chaos erupting around him as Elena's security teams searched the building, a smile touched his lips. "That's it, little coder," he whispered to his screens. "You're almost there." His fingers moved swiftly across his own interface, implementing the protocols he'd designed for this exact moment. Through Quantum Tech's quantum network, a new pattern began to emerge, his response to the lullaby's call. Back in the cabin, Casimir's screen suddenly blazed with new data. The lullaby's encryption patterns began shifting, responding to an external input that matched their rhythm perfectly. "Mom!" he called out, excitement making his voice shake. "Someone's accessing the network, the signature. It's him. It's Dad." Ambrosia rushed back to her station, her heart racing as she recognized Grayson's distinctive coding style. But this was different from his previous messages. This was live, dynamic, a real-time connection reaching out across the digital void. The cabin's quantum processors hummed louder as two consciousness patterns, father and son, began to synchronize through code. On every screen, the lullaby's encryption evolved into something new, a duet of digital signatures, each enhancing and completing the other. "He's leading us somewhere," Casimir said, his fingers flying to keep up with the evolving patterns. "These coordinates, they're encrypted into the melody itself." Through his quantum link, Grayson could see his son working, could feel the resonance of their matched consciousness patterns, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. But time was running out. Elena's forces were closing in, and the corrupt code they'd implanted in quantum tech systems was fighting back against his attempts to purge it. "Trust the pattern, son," he whispered, embedding a new message into the streaming data. "Find your way home." In the cabin, Casimir's screens filled with cascading encryption layers, each one more complex than the last. But where others would have seen chaos, he saw music, the same patterns that had flowed through his dreams his entire life. "It's not just coordinates," he realized, his young face lighting up with understanding. "The whole encryption scheme, it's based on harmony, mathematical resonance at a quantum level." Ambrosia leaned closer, her expertise in quantum encryption recognizing what her son had discovered. "Your father always said that the most beautiful code was like music, that true security came from harmony, not force. And look at this," Casimir pointed to a recurring sequence. "These patterns, they're like DNA, but for consciousness. The way we think, the way we see the world, it's all encoded in the music." Through their quantum connection, Grayson felt a surge of pride. His son hadn't just inherited his ability to code. He'd inherited his way of seeing the beauty in patterns, the music in mathematics. A warning flashed across his screens. Elena's teams had reached his floor. Soon they would breach his lab's security. But it didn't matter now. The connection had been made, the legacy passed on. In the cabin, Casimir began implementing new encryption protocols, his fingers moving in perfect synchronization with patterns he'd never been taught, but somehow knew by heart. The lullaby's code transformed under his touch, becoming a bridge between consciousness patterns, separated by time and space. "Dad's in trouble," he said suddenly, reading meaning in the subtle variations of the incoming data. "The harmonics are shifting, becoming unstable. Something's interfering with the quantum connection." Ambrosia was already moving, activating emergency protocols she'd hoped never to use. "Your father left us everything we need," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "The cabin's quantum core, the consciousness encryption, the musical patterns, they're all parts of a larger system. A quantum consciousness network," Casimir breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's what Project Legacy really is, not a weapon or a security system, but a way to protect human consciousness itself from being controlled or corrupted." Through their deteriorating connection, Grayson sent one final message, encoded in the same musical patterns he'd written into his son's lullaby years ago. "The encryption key lies in the harmony between minds that think as one. Trust in the patterns that connect us. Some codes can't be broken because they're written not in mathematics, but in love." Casimir's fingers moved with newfound purpose, implementing encryption protocols that seemed to flow directly from his consciousness into the quantum network. The cabin's systems responded, their processors synchronizing with his natural rhythm. "I understand now," he said softly, watching as his code merged with his father's patterns. The lullaby wasn't just a song or a cipher, it was a key. A way to prove that consciousness patterns can be inherited, that the way we think can be passed down just like any other trait. Ambrosia watched in amazement as her son's work transformed the cabin's quantum network into something entirely new. A symphony of consciousness patterns that could protect human minds from external control while allowing natural connections to flourish. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. But Casimir wasn't finished. His fingers continued their dance across the holographic keys, weaving new harmonies into the quantum encryption. "We can save him," he said with quiet determination. "The network doesn't just protect consciousness, it connects it. If we can stabilize these patterns." Through their quantum link, Grayson felt his son's efforts reaching out across the digital void. Even as Elena's forces prepared to breach his lab, he began implementing his own harmonious protocols, creating a resonance that would echo through quantum tech's corrupted systems. The code of honor that had driven him to protect humanity's free will had found its perfect expression in his son's natural ability to see the music in mathematics, the patterns in chaos. Together, their consciousness patterns created something that no amount of corporate control or military force could overcome. As dawn began to paint the Cascade Mountains in shades of gold, father and son worked in perfect synchronization across the quantum network, their code transforming Project Legacy into exactly what it was always meant to be: a symphony of protected consciousness playing across time and space. The battle was far from over, but the most important connection had been made. Through the language of code and the music of mathematics, a family separated by circumstance had found their way back to each other. Now they just had to hold on to that connection long enough to save not just themselves, but the very essence of human free will. Chapter 11. The Confrontation. The quantum tech server facility hummed with the combined power of thousands of quantum processors, their crystalline cores glowing like artificial stars in the vast underground chamber. Through the facility's security feeds, Casimir watched the unfolding drama from the safety of the cabin's quantum network, his small hands steady on the holographic controls as he coordinated the most important hack of his young life. "Security breach in Sector 7, reported an automated voice as Elena's teams moved through the building. Quantum containment protocols failing, consciousness encryption patterns destabilizing. In his sealed laboratory, Grayson Finlow worked frantically to contain the damage. The corrupt code that Elena had introduced into the system was spreading like a digital virus, threatening to turn Project Legacy's protective encryption into a weapon of mass consciousness control. "The harmonics are all wrong," Casimir muttered, his eyes darting between multiple screens showing various parts of the facility. "They're trying to force the patterns into alignment instead of letting them resonate naturally." Ambrosia stood behind him, her own fingers flying across a secondary interface as she helped coordinate their countermeasures. "Your father's original design was based on voluntary resonance, consciousness patterns harmonizing by choice. They're trying to override that basic principle." Through their quantum connection, they could see Grayson implementing emergency protocols, fighting to prevent Elena's corrupted version of Project Legacy from going online. But he was running out of time and options. "Teams in position," Elena's voice echoed through the facility's communication system. "Prepare for final consciousness override test. All personnel to designated safe zones." "Mom," Casimir said urgently, "look at these pattern analyses. The corruption isn't just in the code, it's affecting the actual quantum field throughout the building. If they activate their version of the system, every mind connected to Quantum Tech's network would be vulnerable to manipulation," Ambrosia finished, her face pale, "including your father's." But Casimir had already spotted something else, a subtle variation in the quantum harmonics that most would have missed. His inherited ability to see patterns in chaos revealed a possibility hidden in plain sight. "Dad left us a back door," he said, fingers moving with renewed purpose. "Look at the base frequency of the quantum processors. It matches the lullaby's core harmonics exactly." Through their secure connection, Grayson's voice reached them, distorted but determined. "The music is the key. Natural resonance can't be forced. It has to be invited." Casimir nodded, understanding flowing between father and son through their matched consciousness patterns. "We need to rewrite their override protocols, but not with traditional code. We need to use harmony." His fingers began dancing across the interface in a new rhythm, implementing encryption patterns that followed musical principles rather than standard programming logic. The cabin's quantum processors responded, synchronizing with his natural frequency. On the security feeds, they could see Elena's teams preparing to breach Grayson's lab. But something else was happening too. The facility's quantum field was beginning to shift, responding to the harmonious patterns Casimir was introducing into the system. "It's working," Ambrosia breathed, watching as corruption indicators began to drop across multiple sectors. The natural resonance is overwhelming their forced protocols. Through their quantum link, Grayson felt his son's work spreading through quantum tech systems. Where Elena's team had tried to impose rigid control, Casimir's patterns invited voluntary synchronization. The difference was subtle but profound, like the difference between a forced march and a dance. "Quantum field fluctuation detected," the facility's AI announced. "Unknown consciousness patterns integrating with primary network." Elena's voice crackled over the comm system, sharp with alarm. "What's happening? Where is this interference coming from?" But Casimir was barely listening. His focus had narrowed to the delicate work of weaving his father's original protection protocols back into the system's quantum fabric. Each line of code was like a note in a symphony, each pattern a phrase in an ongoing composition. "The consciousness encryption was never meant to be a cage," he said softly, understanding flowing through him like music. "It was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where minds could connect without losing their individual harmony." Through the security feeds, they watched as Elena burst into Grayson's lab, her face contorted with fury as she realized her plans were unraveling. "What have you done?" she demanded. Grayson stood calmly at his workstation, a slight smile playing across his face as he felt his son's consciousness patterns strengthening throughout the system. "I showed you what Project Legacy really was," he said quietly. "Not a tool for control, but a testament to the power of natural connection." "Security systems compromised," the AI reported. "Quantum field harmonics stabilizing under new parameters." Casimir's fingers moved faster now, implementing the final phases of their countermeasure. The cabin's processors sang with pure quantum resonance as his consciousness patterns, so perfectly matched with his father's, created a new kind of encryption throughout Quantum Tech's network. "It's beautiful," Ambrosia whispered, watching as corrupted code transformed into harmonious patterns across every screen, like watching digital DNA heal itself. Elena's security teams found their equipment failing as the quantum field shifted to its natural frequency. The forced override protocols they'd planted throughout the system dissolved, replaced by protection algorithms that worked with human consciousness rather than against it. "Quantum containment breach in Section 9, the AI announced. "Consciousness encryption patterns achieving spontaneous harmony." Through their connection, Grayson sent his son a message encoded in the same patterns as his lullaby. "You've done it, little coder. You've shown them what consciousness encryption was always meant to be." Casimir smiled, feeling the rightness of the patterns flowing through the quantum network. "We did it together," he replied through their link. "The harmony was always there. We just had to let it sing." On the security feeds, they watched as Elena's carefully constructed plans fell apart. The corrupted version of Project Legacy that she'd tried to force into existence was being transformed, one quantum bit at a time, into something beautiful and protective. "You don't understand what you're destroying," she raged at Grayson. "The power we could have had." "That's exactly what I understand," he replied calmly. "Power isn't about control. It's about protection, about preserving what makes us human." The facility's quantum processors pulsed with pure light as Casimir's harmonious patterns spread throughout the system. Where Elena had tried to impose uniformity, natural variety flourished. Where she had sought control, willing cooperation emerged. Security containment failing, the AI reported. Quantum field achieving stable resonance under new protocols. Through their quantum link, father and son worked together to complete the transformation, their consciousness patterns creating a symphony of protection that would ensure Project Legacy could never be used as a weapon. As dawn broke over Seattle, the quantum tech facility hummed with a new kind of power. Not the harsh dominance Elena had sought, but the gentle strength of minds choosing to connect while remaining uniquely themselves. The confrontation had revealed the true nature of consciousness encryption, not a tool for control, but a testament to the power of natural harmony. In the end, it wasn't force or dominance that had won the day, but the simple, profound connection between a father and son who saw the music in mathematics and the beauty in code. Through the quantum network, their consciousness patterns continued to resonate, creating protection protocols that would guard human free will for generations to come. The legacy they had created together was not one of power over others, but of power shared between minds that chose to dance in digital harmony. Chapter 12. Symphony of Souls. Snow fell softly outside the mountain cabin, each flake catching moonlight like quantum bits of memory dancing through the night. Inside, Casimir sat at his workstation, his small fingers hovering over the holographic interface as the clock struck midnight. The quantum processors hummed a gentle harmony that matched the lullaby playing in his mind, the song that had connected him to his father across years of separation. Through the cabin's vast windows, the Cascade Mountains stood like ancient guardians, their peaks ghostly in the winter moonlight. Ambrosia moved quietly behind her son, her hand resting gently on his shoulder as they watched multiple screens tracking a single signal moving through the darkness toward them. "He's really coming home," Casimir whispered, his voice trembling with 5 years of waiting. The quantum network they'd created together filled the cabin with a soft blue glow, consciousness patterns flowing like digital rivers through the processors. After the confrontation at Quantum Tech, after Elena's arrest and the protection of Project Legacy, there was only one piece left to complete their family's code. A new pattern appeared in the quantum field, familiar yet changed, like a melody played in a different key. Casimir's fingers moved instinctively across his interface, harmonizing his own consciousness signature with the approaching signal. "I can feel him," he said softly, tears beginning to streak down his cheeks. "Through the code, it's like he's been with us all along, just waiting for us to learn the right song." Ambrosia's own tears fell freely as she watched their consciousness patterns merge in the quantum display, father, mother, and son, creating a harmony that transcended both digital and physical space. The cabin's security systems chirped softly, recognizing an approaching vehicle. Through the falling snow, headlights appeared on the mountain road, moving with deliberate care through the winter night. Casimir's screens filled with cascading code as the quantum field responded to the proximity of its creator. The encryption patterns that had protected them for so long were transforming, becoming something new, a bridge between separation and reunion. Dad encoded parts of himself into everything he built, Casimir realized, watching the patterns shift. The security systems, Project Legacy, even my lullaby. He was leaving pieces of his consciousness for us to find, teaching me how to see the world through his eyes until I was ready to understand. The vehicle's headlights disappeared around the final bend, but they could feel the approach through the quantum network. Grayson's consciousness pattern grew stronger, harmonizing with theirs in a digital symphony that made the cabin's processors sing. Ambrosia moved toward the door, but Casimir remained at his station, his fingers moving in one final sequence. On his screens, years of encrypted messages, hidden patterns, and protected protocols merged into a single stream of consciousness. a quantum testament to a father's love expressed through the language of code. The sound of footsteps crunching through snow reached them through the night. Casimir's hands began to shake as he implemented the last encryption key, the one he'd discovered hidden in his lullaby's harmony. The cabin's door opened, bringing a swirl of snowflakes and cold mountain air, and there, silhouetted against the winter night, stood Grayson Finlow. 5 years had added silver to his hair and new lines around his eyes, but his smile was exactly as Ambrosia remembered. He took one step into the cabin, then stopped, his gaze fixed on the small figure at the quantum interface. Casimir turned slowly in his chair, his hazel eyes, so like his father's, wide with wonder and tears. For a moment neither moved, their connection humming through the quantum field that surrounded them. Then Grayson spoke, his voice rough with emotion. The consciousness encryption was never about the technology. It was about this moment, about finding a way back to you both that no one could ever corrupt or control. Casimir stood on shaking legs, 5 years of longing and questions trembling in his small frame. "I learned your code," he whispered. "I found all your patterns, solved all your puzzles." "You did more than that, little coder," Grayson said softly, kneeling down to his son's level. "You improved them, made them more beautiful than I ever could. You didn't just find my patterns, you made them sing." The quantum field around them pulsed with pure light as their consciousness patterns synchronized completely for the first time. Through their shared connection, lifetimes of love and learning flowed between them. Every lesson Grayson had encoded into his work, every intuitive leap Casimir had made to understand it. "Dad!" Casimir's voice broke as he took one stumbling step forward, then another. Grayson opened his arms, and suddenly Casimir was running, crossing the physical space between them, just as their consciousness patterns had crossed the digital void. Father and son collided in an embrace that sent ripples through the quantum field, their shared tears falling like binary rain. Ambrosia moved to join them, and the cabin's processors sang with the harmony of their reunited family. Through the quantum network they'd built together, their consciousness patterns merged into something greater than code could express, a symphony of souls finally playing in perfect resonance. "I wrote you into everything," Grayson whispered into his son's curls, holding him close as 5 years of separation dissolved like snow in sunlight. Every line of code, every encryption key, every protection protocol, they were all letters in a love letter I was writing to your future self. And you didn't just read them, you wrote back. You made the code into music. Casimir clung to his father, feeling the steady heartbeat that matched the rhythm of their shared consciousness patterns. "I heard you," he said through his tears. "In the lullaby, in the puzzles, in every pattern you left for me to find. I heard you teaching me, guiding me. And now we'll never lose that connection again," Grayson promised, drawing Ambrosia into their embrace. "What we've built together, the true Project Legacy, isn't just about protecting humanity's consciousness. It's about preserving what makes us human, our ability to choose, to grow, to love." Through the cabin's windows, the snow continued to fall, each flake a tiny reflection of the infinite patterns that connected them. The quantum processors hummed their harmony into the night, carrying the symphony of their reunited consciousness patterns out into a world that would never again threaten to tear them apart. For in the end, the most powerful code wasn't written in quantum encryption or consciousness patterns. It was written in the space between heartbeats, in the tears of joy that fell like starlight, in the profound silence of a family finally, irrevocably home. The code that connected us had found its final expression, not in the digital realm where it began, but in the simple, eternal miracle of a father holding his son, of a family reunited, of love that had transcended both time and space to write itself into the very fabric of reality. Subscribe if you liked.